Here is the news. Japan's long-threatened aggression in the Far East began tonight with air attacks on United States naval bases in the Pacific.
It was World War II, and the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. The American public required a scapegoat. So who would be blamed? American eyes turned to the Japanese immigrants and their American born children. It was the tipping point that sent the lives of 110,000 of these Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans in a downward spiral. Where did it all start? Japanese migration began with a group of 380,000 Japanese who immigrated to Hawaii and the mainland America between 1886 and 1924. They were young laboring men who came to work in American plantations, railroads, mines, factories, and farms. Economic hardship and new hope drove them to become an immigrant working class in America. In Hawaii, Japanese immigrants, along with other Asians, were laborers, the bottom of the plantation hierarchy, managed by the white plantation owners. In 1920, 43% of the population living in Hawaii was Japanese. They found power in numbers and formed labor unions to establish their voice. Meanwhile, on the mainland, Asians were a minority. Only 2% of the population in California was Japanese. The Japanese tended to live together in Japan towns. Their hopes of survival rested on each other. Ethnic solidarity would provide for their needs jobs, homes, and a welcoming community. Elsewhere, they would face hostile racism. However, while they were able to survive by living together in ethnic communities, they also simultaneously isolated themselves from the main American community. Japanese immigrants experienced discrimination from their arrival at the American docks. Groups of young, typically white men would throw bricks or rocks at them. The population of Japanese Americans was concentrated into the Pacific Coast states, especially California. They became a considerable force in the agrarian market, and as a result, became successful competitors with their white neighbors. In 1920, Japanese controlled about 460,000 acres of land. Meanwhile, anti Japanese sentiment was being stirred up.
There was a point at which, my mother tells me, at which the white workers of the mill tried to run the Japanese workers out of the area. They made it very unpleasant for Japanese workers and Japanese families at that mill. He remained insisting that he was not going to be run out by a bunch of rowdies. However, it was unpleasant enough, and therefore they finally moved out. But there were occasions of anti-Japanese feelings expressed one way or another.
According to the American Federationist, Japanese workers do not share the same God, hopes, ambitions, or love of this country as the white workers did. Pressure from white farmers and white laborers initiated an era of Japanese exclusion in America. White workers formed the Asiatic Exclusion League, which called for the restricted immigration of Asians to America. Meanwhile, the native sons of the Golden West published and circulated anti-Japanese rhetoric. "Would you like your daughter to marry a Japanese?" they queried. "If not, demand that your representative in the legislature vote for segregation of whites and Asiatics in the public schools." This call for segregation led to controversy when the San Francisco Board of Education issued a statement that ordered all Chinese, Japanese, and Korean children to be sent to the Oriental School. As a result, the issue of segregation became a point of contention for the Japanese government. The real issue, it was soon found out, was the immigration of Japanese. A statement released from the school officials read, "The result we desire, the cessation of the immigration of Japanese laborers, skilled or unskilled, to this country, will be speedily achieved." Thus, the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1908 was negotiated and imposed. This agreement restricted the immigration of Japanese laborers, but allowed their wives, parents, and children to immigrate. A series of restricting land laws followed, the Alien Land Law of 1913 being the first. This act prevented aliens ineligible for citizenship from owning land in California. Many Japanese immigrants would be forced to use their American-born children's names to own or lease land. Similar laws were enacted in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Arizona, Montana, New Mexico, Nebraska, Texas, Kansas, Louisiana, Minnesota, and Missouri. 4 years later, the National Origins Act prohibited the entry of aliens ineligible for citizenship. Though not explicitly stated, it prevented Japanese immigration. The Nisei culture of second-generation Japanese Americans developed from these discriminatory circumstances. Their first-generation Issei parents hoped that their American children would pave the way to acceptance. Education became stressed as the pathway to opportunity. With an American education, the Nisei could break free from the stigma of their parents' fruit and vegetable stands and come to be admitted into American culture on the basis of merit, and merit alone. To aid the struggle against discrimination, the Japanese American Citizens League, or JACL, was formed. This dedicated group of Nisei believed patriotism and all-around super-Americanism would force them to be accepted by white America. Jimmy Sakamoto, the second JACL president, launched the Second Generation Development Program, which stated that Nisei would become American citizens by contributing to the social life, economic welfare, and civic welfare of the nation. The program was instituted in the face of mounting anti-Japanese sentiment, caused by the onslaught of World War II. Pearl Harbor exacerbated these sentiments. When Navy Secretary Frank Knox stated that he thought the most effective fifth column work of the entire war was done in Hawaii, it was assumed the fifth column work was done by the resident Japanese immigrants and Japanese Americans. He sent the public into hysteria. His claim was inaccurate. Naval intelligence and FBI investigations both assented that no sabotage had actually occurred. However, this press statement convinced many that Japanese Americans were saboteurs.
Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants.
Rumors circulated that Japanese plantation workers cut swaths into their crops to direct bomber planes, that they parked cars to create traffic chaos, and that they signaled Japanese planes.
The sheriffs and state patrol came in their sedans. There must have been about 8, 9 of those sedans, and they came in and said, "Get going, the vigilante group is forming, they're coming down through the tunnel and they're coming out to kill you." So they said, grab what you can, throw them in a pillowcase and throw them in the trunk of the car, whatever you can, and make sure there's important valuables that you can do. And so we are all herded into these little state patrol sedans.
Pressure from the American public, military officials, and labor leaders mounted. The Federal Bureau of Investigation began raiding Japanese homes for signs of espionage. They found no evidence of any such action. Soon, the Japanese community began being forced out of their homes. The commanding general of the Western Defense Command, General John DeWitt, famously stated that there was no such thing as a loyal Japanese. He, as well as many politicians and War Department officials, completely backed what they called evacuation. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066, which allowed the Secretary of War to remove the Japanese from any area deemed necessary. The evacuees were now classified as enemy aliens. Camps were hastily built in remote and desolate areas. Internees were housed in former fairgrounds, stockyards, and raised tracks. Stables became bedrooms, and the smells of animals lingered. They were fenced in with barbed wire, armed guards, and watchtowers. The call of war gave an opportunity to Nisei men. The government was now calling for the enlistment of these internees, hypocritically disregarding their initial grounds for internment. A loyalty questionnaire was developed. A fraction of those who passed were segregated into the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, an all-Japanese infantry unit. Many were motivated by the hopes that they were proving themselves to be loyal citizens, and the call "Go for broke" became the regiment's motto. The 442nd Regiment became the most decorated unit in American history. The evacuation order was retracted before the war ended, and many returned to raised farms and increased antagonization. Japanese Americans had experienced the loss of their livelihoods, properties, homes, and personal belongings. They had endured 4 years of detainment in the internment camps. They had proven their loyalty to the United States by fighting in the war. Yet when they were finally freed from the camps, they would face a grim future, trying to rebuild their lives in the face of heightened hostility and racism from other Americans.